unregulated and unbalanced demands for scarce water resources mean that by 2050, more than 5 billion people could have restricted access to fresh water. However, there is an effective approach to sustainably sharing and safeguarding the world's limited water resources. Integrated water resources management is a comprehensive framework for managing water resources, balancing social and economic needs while protecting ecosystems for future generations. Those countries that have effectively implemented IWRM have seen clear benefits and are leading the way in sustainable water management. However, data from Indicator 651 shows that many countries are lagging behind. To accelerate IWRM, we need to strengthen political will, improve cross-sectoral coordination, increase data collection, sharing and transparency, build technical and human capacity, and secure dedicated financing for IWRM. Without accelerated progress, we will fail to achieve clean water and sanitation for all. Countries must act now and safeguard the world's water resources. To find out how the UN Environment Programme, the Global Water Partnership, the CapNet Network, and the UNEP DHI Centre are supporting countries in IWRM implementation, please visit the IWRM data portal and the SDG 6 IWRM support programme.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to this webinar today, and thanks for taking your time on this Monday to be listening in and hopefully contributing to the understanding of how the world is managing its water resources. My name is Colin Heron from the Global Water Partnership, and I'll be pleased to be facilitating this webinar today. We have a very packed agenda, and we hope that you will find it interesting and useful as well for your work. Before we get started, some quick housekeeping rules. All of you will be muted.
جميعكم سيتم وضعكم على وضع الصامت.
I'm sorry, I'm hearing an echo, the translation.
Извините, у меня появляется эхо перевода.
Okay, all of the participants will be muted except for the designated speakers. If you have any general comments, please feel free to use the chat function, which hopefully you can see the option for. If you have any questions for the panelists, we will ask you to please put them in the Q&A function. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can during today's session, but we will make sure to follow up afterwards with those that we cannot answer due to the lack of time. If you do have any difficulty with your audio connection, please write to our tech hosts in the chat, and we have interpretation available in Russian, French, and Arabic for this morning's session. To get us started and to kick things off, I would like to ask the tech host to put on the introductory video from the Vice Chair of UN Water, Ms. Kellyanne Naylor.
Dear colleagues and friends of water, thank you very much for joining this webinar today to discuss progress towards Sustainable Development Goal 6. This webinar is part of a series of webinars taking place this month, each focusing on global progress towards a specific SDG 6 indicator and target. Before we get into the details, I wanted to share a few important messages about overall progress towards SDG 6 and how the UN is working together to report on our progress. We are now 6 years into the SDGs, and for the first time, we have water and sanitation data from almost all the countries in the world. This country data were compiled last year by the UN custodian agencies who joined forces under the UN Water Integrated Monitoring Initiative for SDG 6, or as we fondly call it, IMI SDG 6. The unprecedented level of reporting is a major accomplishment for us as a global community, but even more so for all the country focal points who are joining us in this webinar. On behalf of UN Water, I would like to thank all of you for your extra hard efforts in monitoring SDG 6 in your country this year, especially in the difficult times we've been all living through. When we look at this data, they sadly confirmed the tendency that we first saw in 2018, that we are off track to achieve sustainable water and sanitation for all by 2030. Taking a look at some of the hard facts about SDG 6, we see that billions of people worldwide still live without safe water and sanitation and basic hygiene services. Nearly 10% of the world's population still live in areas with extreme water stress. We know that wastewater is being released untreated into the environment, and 1 in 5 of the world's river basins are changing rapidly, which is exacerbated by changes in climate. We see that sustainable management of water resources remains out of reach for many countries. The data show that in order to meet our goals and targets, we are going to need to accelerate progress, and in some areas up to 4 times faster to be able to meet SDG 6 within the next 9 years. More than anything, we're going to need politicians and policymakers at all levels to be able to set bolder priorities and quickly. But the good news is that we already have a lot of sustainable solutions in place. Last year, UN Water launched the SDG 6 Global Acceleration Framework with the full backing of the UN family to mobilize action across government, civil society, and the private sector across the UN to be able to better align our efforts, optimize financing, and enhance capacity and governance. From our work with countries and from their data, we've learned a lot about opportunities for accelerating progress. We've learned about the importance of scaling up capacity building, coordinated action, mobilizing political will. And of course, we've learned how data and information can be used to better guide policy and decision makers in their work. Because despite these heroic monitoring efforts of the last year, we still see large data gaps. Our ambition and hope with this data and with our SDG 6 reports are to further encourage and support national and subnational data collection and ultimately help policy and decision makers to take informed action. This is what IMI SDG 6 will be focusing on as we go forward, and we call on the entire water community from global to local efforts to join us in taking this forward. I wish you a very fruitful and lively webinar today and very warmly welcome you to join the other indicator webinars that we're organizing this month. Thank you for your attention and for all of your continued efforts to drive progress towards our common goal to ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kellyanne. And with those opening remarks, let's now turn over to the audience. We want to know who you are and what your role with SDG 6.5.1 monitoring was. So if you could please go to polev.com/GWP. You could do that on your laptop or on your phone, whichever is most convenient. We have 3 quick questions for you. The first is if you can locate yourself on the map and tell us where you're joining us from today. So I can see that there are quite a few participants from Northern Europe, Southern Europe as well, from the Middle East region. We have India, we have a few from Australia, a few from Southeast Asia as well. It's good. We have one from the Caribbean. At least one. Okay, we have a larger contingent joining from Southern Europe and a few from Eastern Europe as well. This is good. We have a wonderful geographical spread. I hope that everyone's able to enjoy and use the technology. We have a couple joining from Eastern Africa as well, which is good to see. So yes, we have an interesting spread of participants today. if I can now go on to the next question, which is what was your role in SDG 6.5.1 monitoring and in the reporting process in 2020? There are 4 options. A is I helped coordinate the consultations. B is yes, I provided inputs to the survey consultations. C is no, I did not have the opportunity to contribute. And D is no, it's not relevant for me. Okay, so right now we have an interesting split with about a quarter of you involved in coordinating the consultations. Just under a third contributed in some way, provided inputs to the survey or the consultations. About 37% didn't have the opportunity, interestingly, and it's also interesting to see that 7% mentioned, or 10% now mentioned that it wasn't relevant for them. I hope this webinar is relevant for that 6 or 7% today at least. Okay, so we'll leave that for a couple of seconds because there's still a lot of movement there. Okay, now I think we should perhaps go on to the next question. And we have a pretty much 3-way split between the first 3 answers in that. So the next question is, in 1 to 2 words, what is most needed to improve water management in your country? And this should appear as a word cloud on screen. So let's hope that the technology is on our side this morning. Strong institutions. Water management. Quite a few keywords. Water would be expected to be one of those keywords. Coordination, governance, political. I can guess that there are quite a few nouns coming after political. Sharing, equitable, allocation. Many keywords. Transparency, institutions, collaborative, financing. This is very good to see. Education. Okay, many of the key terms that we would probably expect to see. It's interesting to see that the bigger words are those that are appearing most commonly. I'll leave that for a couple more seconds because there are still quite a few terms appearing. Okay, I think now that's stabilized, and thank you so much to all of you for your contributions. I have to say that I would agree with all of those words. There weren't any there that I would say are not relevant for this conversation. So that's a good starting point. So to get us in the mood as well in terms of the common understanding of the key messages from the monitoring process that took place last year. I'm pleased to hand over to my colleague Maya Bertule from UNEP DHI Center, who will walk us through those key messages. Maya, over to you, please.
Thank you, Colin, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you today. My name is Maya Bertule. I'm a Senior Technical Advisor at the UNEP DHI Center, and I'll kick us off with just a brief overview of the key messages from the global reporting round on SDG indicator 6.5.1 that represents the degree of implementation of integrated water resources management, or IWRM. Next slide, please. So the global reporting round on this indicator took place in 2020, so last year, and this was the second time countries reported on indicator, with the baseline reporting round taking place in 2017. So UNEP, who is the custodian agency for this indicator, received 171 reports in 2020, so a very good global coverage. For those of you not familiar with the survey, it consists of 33 questions that countries then rate in terms of the different elements of IWRM and their degree of implementation. We also know that most countries agree on the scores for these 33 questions through some degree of stakeholder consultation process. And you can see the various ways that the stakeholders have been involved on the map here. Next slide, please. In terms of the main findings, so degree of implementation of IWRM is rated from very low to very high representing a score from 0 to 100. Globally, and this is the global average score, we have made modest progress since 2017. So we moved from 49% in 2017 to 54 out of 100 in 2020. And you can see the distribution of the national scores here on the map. So good news is that we no longer have any countries in the very low implementation category. And you can see the distribution of the national scores in the pie chart on the left side here. However, we do still have more than 80 countries in the lower, so low to medium low implementation levels. So definitely some work to be done globally. Next slide, please. In terms of regions, so regionally, of course, these are just regional averages. We see the lowest implementation levels of IWRM in Latin America and the Caribbean, Oceania, Central and Southern Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. We also see of the various dimensions of IWRM, financing is still the lowest scoring dimension on average. In terms of barriers, what we see countries mentioning, and they do so in the free text responses, political will and commitment and lack of coordination, as we also saw in the short poll we just had, are really key barriers to implementation. Of course, also insufficient financing, weak capacity, also lack of monitoring, and ineffective legal frameworks that perhaps prevent better implementation of sustainable management actions. Next slide, please. So just 3 key messages I would like to highlight that came out of this reporting round. Let's proceed to the next one. Thank you. So number 1, globally, the rate of implementation of IWRM urgently needs to double. So if you look at the chart here, you see that the progress we have made over the 3 years is very modest. And if we are to have any chance of achieving the target by 2030, target being very high degree of implementation, we need to at least double the global rate of progress. Next slide, please. Message number 2, real and rapid progress is possible. And in the map here, you can see the progress that countries have made over the last few years. And as you can see, we have more than 20 countries that really made substantial progress. And we have almost 45 countries that are close to target. However, we still see from the progress so far that 107 countries will not achieve target by 2030. So the key really is to accelerate progress in these countries and to maintain momentum in the countries that are making good progress or already are close to the target. Next slide, please. And finally, business as usual is not an option. We also see that there has been focus on IWRM implementation for a couple of decades now. However, as you can see here, none of the dimensions are really on track on achieving target by 2030. But there are a lot of very valuable lessons that we have collected from both reporting rounds. So a lot of very practical, pragmatic examples of what countries are doing and how they're furthering their implementation. So key is really to look at these and see how we can make IWRM implementation better in practice. Next slide, please. And finally, some key recommendations from the global reporting round. So key enablers we really see are political will and action planning. So high-level support to IWRM implementation and very specific action plans. So breaking down what can be done in practice along the different aspects of IWRM and making an action plan of how to approach the on-the-ground implementation of sustainable water resources management. And focus areas here are coordination and alignment. So coordination not only across national institutions, but also across the levels. So national, subnational, basin level. Also increased coordination and coordinated financing, prioritizing basin aquifer management, capacity development, also inclusive participation. So really making sure that all stakeholder groups are involved in meaningful decision-making when it comes to how their water resources are managed and developed. And also updating, implementing legal frameworks. We do see that enabling environment that facilitates IWRM implementation is really key. And of course, last but not least, promoting transboundary cooperation, which also relates to basin and aquifer management. More on all of these and the results, of course, in our reports. With that, I would ask to move to the next slide and say thank you and hand it over to my colleague, Paul Glennie, who will speak a bit more on the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya, and hello, everyone. My name's Paul Glennie, and I'm a Senior Technical Advisor at UNEP DHI. In this presentation, I'd like to share some of the ideas and resources for advancing towards SDG Target 6.5 for different actors. This presentation is based on Chapter 6 of the full global report, where you can find more information if you're interested. Of course, many of these actors, including many of you on the call, are already tackling some of these issues, but this presentation includes some of the overarching actions that most countries either are undertaking or will undertake. And the next presentation will present what we are doing to support countries through the SDG 6 IWRM support program. So one of the most commonly reported challenges to implementing IWRM was the challenge of coordinating land and water management across sectors in practice, even if there may be some arrangements for this on paper. As you know, this includes actions like coordinating strategies, laws, and management arrangements across sectors such as agriculture, urban planning, and the environment. And of course, cross-sector coordination is the very heart of integrated water resources management. So looking at the dark blue cell at the top of the slide there, countries that are in the strongest position are those which have assigned clear institutional responsibility to lead and coordinate the implementation of IWRM activities, or in other words, they've created some form of task force. And critically, many countries also pointed to the need to secure high-level political support to achieve their overall progress on IWRM implementation. And one important action to strengthen the political will is to be able to communicate the value of implementing IWRM to support so many other sustainable development objectives in a coordinated way. And we encourage countries to build on the Indicator 651 reporting and other national processes to engage across sectors and stakeholders at all levels, to develop and implement plans for prioritizing and accelerating the key aspects of water management. And support for this is available through the support program. Next slide, please. Now I'd just like to touch on some of the potential next steps for some of the other actors to support coordinated efforts towards Target 6.5. Firstly, sustainable development partners, which including NGOs, private sector, UN country teams, academia, and so many others, working on various different aspects of water management, from water supply and sanitation to irrigation to tourism. And we recognize that everyone is doing great work, but more than ever, we encourage organizations to find the synergies and work together to achieve multiple goals and accelerate progress towards 2030. And we urge partners to get involved in the stakeholder engagement processes, which we've just discussed, which may be being run by government agencies or NGOs such as country water partnerships. A special mention here of the private sector, which is already showing great willingness and potential to contribute to SDG 6. And there are many examples and tools of how to address water-related risks, as pointed out in Chapter 6 of the full report. And the main message I'd like to give here is that these efforts need to be scaled up rapidly. For regional bodies and transboundary organizations, we found that there is enormous potential to develop and implement regional frameworks to support implementation at the national level, as well as to facilitate country-to-country learning, coordinated funding, and support transboundary cooperation. And just one example of this is the Africa Water Investment Program, which aims to mobilize $30 billion in climate resilient water investments by 2030. And finally, we urge investment banks and donors to ramp up the coordination of programs and investments to support multiple development objectives and to build on country needs, which countries may have identified through SDG 6 processes. And one pathway to identify these needs is through the support program's action plan searcher, and another is through the SDG 6 acceleration framework. And for anyone wishing to get more involved in the implementation of water management in such a coordinated way from local to global levels, we urge you to contact the support program to discuss possibilities. Next slide, please. And just lastly, the SDG 6 acceleration framework is another pathway for coordination across all the actors I've just mentioned. It is itself coordinated by UN Water and aims to coordinate the international community's support to countries to achieve SDG 6. It focuses on the 5 areas shown here, and you can browse over 100 actions which may provide inspiration for your work, or you may be able to identify opportunities for support. Next slide, please. So thanks for your attention, and I'd like to hand over to my colleague Sandra to tell us more about the support options available for some of these activities through the IWRM support program.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you for being on this webinar. My name is Sandra Broman. I am a program associate with the SDG 6 IWRM support program. So as said, for countries who are interested in seeking support to advance their IWRM, there is the SDG 6 IWRM support program, who assists governments in designing and implementing country-led responses to SDG indicator 651 as an entry point to accelerate progress towards the achievement of water-related SDGs and other development goals. So the support program is coordinated by the Global Water Partnership in collaboration with UNEP DHI Center and CAPNet, and under the guidance of UNEP as the custodian agency for SDG indicator 651. Next slide, please. So how does the SDG 6 IWRM support program work? It is structured along 3 stages. The first stage focuses on identifying challenges. So basically, we are employing the SDG 6.5 national monitoring and reporting frameworks to identify through multi-stakeholder consultations critical areas for attention that hinder progress on IWRM. This stage is usually completed by national governments every 3 years. So it was first done in 2017, and now we just had the 2020 round to evaluate their degree on implementation of IWRM. Stage 2 then is focused on developing responses, on more concretely on developing action plans. So using the key challenges that were identified in the first stage, stage 2 aims to facilitate a government-led multi-stakeholder process to formulate and prioritize appropriate responses to the challenges. This usually then constitutes a series of attractive investment opportunities. We usually try to group them around an action plan, but this can also be called differently, to systematically guide the implementation of solutions to IWRM challenges. And the third stage is focused on implementing solutions. So basically the plans or the action areas that were identified in stage 2, we provide some support and also to countries to help them implement these actions. Next slide, please. So where have we supported so far? Since its inception, the support program has assisted over 70 countries in convening multi-stakeholder consultation workshops. And we have also supported 10 countries in completing an action plan, so in stage 2. And we are currently supporting 4 more and have at least 5 more in the pipeline. So we're continuously actually continuing our work on supporting these countries. Stage 3, so we have supported so far 7 countries in implementing concrete action plans, and we are planning to support 30 more until 2030. Next slide, please. What tools are available to support countries? So for countries that are interested in implementing the approach designed by the support program, there are different options. First, there's the IWRM acceleration package and a free online course that provides basically guiding material for countries that are interested in implementing this approach. Then alternatively, countries can also seek the technical and financial assistance of the support program directly, which is then usually implemented through the Global Water Partnership regional and country water partnerships. Furthermore, for people who are interested in seeing how this works actually in practice, how action plans look in practice, there's the IWRM Action Plan Searcher on our website, where you can have a look and where you can get inspired and see how these actions could look like. We are also currently setting up a community of practice for people actively involved in implementing SDG 651 to exchange experiences. And then finally, there's the IWRM Action Hub. So this is basically a toolbox around IWRM with many useful resources available. Next slide, please. We have also seen that there is a lot of demand for more concrete support, so not only global, but also on regional levels. So this is why we have, for example, also worked with countries in Central America and in the Pan-Asian region to have a more detailed diagnostic of their regions on how they are advancing on IWRM, which has resulted in these 2 reports that you see here. And we're trying to do the same also in other regions, such as the Mediterranean, Western Africa, and South Asia over the course of this and next year. Next slide, please. Then we have also seen, and as my colleagues Paul and Maya have mentioned, there are certain areas that really lag behind in IWRM implementation. So this is why we have also decided to really dedicate a focus to certain areas that are lagging especially behind. This includes gender in IWRM, multi-stakeholder processes, but also financing and data sharing. We have recently launched a report on how to advance towards gender mainstreaming in IWRM, with many concrete country experiences for inspiration and practical recommendations. Then we have also a guide on multi-stakeholder processes that were organized during the SDG 6.5 monitoring and reporting rounds and have summarized our findings in a report. Furthermore, we have we're currently in the setup of a pilot initiative around financing. This initiative is focusing on how we can better channel existing and additional funding into concrete actions. So this is also a way of how we want to support countries more concretely and enable or unlock financing for IWRM. And finally, another initiative we're working on that aims to improve data sharing and to bring data producers and decision makers together, that is called WISE. Next slide, please. So thank you very much for your attention. As the name says, the support program is here to assist and support countries on their path towards advancing IWRM. So we are always looking for further collaboration to increase the impact of our activities, and please do not hesitate to get in touch with us if you seek further support. With these words, I'm handing over to Colin. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Sandra, for that presentation, and to our 3 speakers so far. And this is the point where we open up for the questions from the audience, and we have a few questions in the chat box. We've been answering them as the session has progressed, and I will just briefly touch upon some of those that have already been answered for those that aren't looking at the chat box. first, there was one around if water resources management includes rainwater management as well, and how much emphasis is given to that. And Maya's response was that, yes, rainwater is one of the elements of water which is covered in the management tools. And yeah, there was a question also around rainwater management plans, and we will be glad to join the dots on that. But just to go into some of the open questions, I'd like to, for the first one, hand over to Paul Glennie. There was a question around the main hurdles for advancing IWRM, being political will and financing water projects. The question is, both parties, politicians and financiers, believe in a give and take relationship. We know what to take from them, but are we clear on what to give them back? So Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, that's a very good question. Thanks to the questioner for that one. And it's vital, of course. I'm not sure exactly what we can give them back, but what I would say is that, and this speaks to one of my points in my presentation, and that's what we really need to focus on, as a community, is being able to better communicate the value of implementing water resources management for multiple goals. And I think I said that maybe too many times in my presentation. But so, knowing who the audience is that we're trying to communicate with, and whether that's, in various different political functions, including the finance ministry. And there are some good examples, including one in the report of a process that's happened in Kenya, whereby there's a kind of budget negotiation, and the Kenyan country water partnership of Global Water Partnership there has provided some really solid inputs there into arguing for the value of water resources management, and that has resulted in a significant increase in finance being made available. So I think it's dependent on the country context, but definitely getting involved and being able to communicate with the finance ministry to argue for that case. Thanks.
Yes, thanks, Paul, for that answer. I would like to turn over to Maya for the second question, which is actually, I see you're answering right now, but to go live with that, which is, there was a question around why there's no regional report for the Saudi region. Maya, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, sure, thanks. That's a great question. And in fact, the regional report for Arab states is in preparation. It's with our partners at ESQA, so the regional organization. And I believe at least executive summary, if not the full report, will be launched at the Arab Water Forum. And I'm looking now, the dates I believe are 21st to 23rd of September. So a very timely question, and keep an eye out on the launch of the report. It is in preparation. And if you want to look actually at the baseline report, there was a regional report for the Arab states also for the baseline data reporting round. And you can find that one already at both IWRM data portal and UNEP DHI's homepage. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Maya, for that response. And while all the audience thinks of its questions, and please feel free to put them in the Q&A, I would like to ask a question to all panelists. We're seeing that progress is not yet being achieved at the rate that we need. What is, in your opinion, the biggest obstacle? What is it that we need to do to really reach the target of the 2030 agenda and reach at least very high implementation of IWRM by 2030? Maybe I could ask Sandra first.
Thank you, Colin. Well, first of all, of course, there is no silver bullet for this, but of course, it's highly country specific also, right? This is also why it's so important that you do a proper diagnostic maybe of where the country stands and where its opportunities and challenges lie ahead. And this is exactly something also that we are trying to achieve with the support program. So really try to find customized answers also on how a country can accelerate progress. And what is definitely important is this cross-sectoral approach and this multi-stakeholder approach to finding answers, because as we all know, working in silos won't bring us further and won't unlock also the finances and the commitment needed.
Thank you, Sandra. Very to the point, and excellent response. Would any of you disagree with that, or would you like to add to it? Paul first. Oh, Maya, sorry, you have your microphone open.
No, I definitely agree. And I think maybe what we note from the survey responses and also a lot of the communication with the national focal points, at least what we see where the successes are, is definitely the political will. Because as Sandra also mentioned, there were many ways to achieve and move towards more sustainable water resources management, and they really depend on the country. But perhaps sometimes the task for the individual stakeholders can be a bit overwhelming one, because it is integrated water resources management across levels, across watersheds, etc. So I think first and foremost political will, but also kind of trying to break down that into smaller pieces of what really needs to be done on the different aspects of integrated water resources management. And I think that's perhaps the way we see the survey can be helpful, just to kind of make it relatable and more pragmatic, to see, you know, what is it that it means on the ground, but also having the action plans, for example, because it doesn't maybe necessarily need to be this grand, huge implementation plan. There are steps that can be done on a smaller scale, both nationally, subnationally, maybe targeting just the gender question or gender aspects as a first step. So I think political will to do something and then kind of trying to break it down to something very actionable and pragmatic on the ground is what we see is one part of the success in the countries.
Thanks so much, Maya. And it's a very nice segue into the next question. So Paul, I'd like you to reflect on what we've just heard from Sandra and Maya, but also to build into your response, if possible. One of the other questions which is that there was a reference to practical, pragmatic examples that came up in the survey, and how can we find them in the report? So could you build those two elements into one answer, please?
Yeah, sure. Firstly, just to reflect on Sandra and Maya's comments, totally agree with both of them. Perhaps not to repeat them, so to provide a slightly different angle. I think there's a lot of learning that can be done with neighboring countries as well, among neighboring countries, and I think this regional angle can really benefit a lot of countries, mostly in terms of experience sharing and knowledge sharing, and there are some processes which Sandra has alluded to, and there are others kind of being planned in different areas around the world. And so I'd call on regional organizations to really try and facilitate that as well, and for countries themselves to try to seek, to try to tap in to that regional coordination. And the second question on the sort of practical examples. So in the report in chapter 5, which goes through various different aspects of water management, whether that be data and information management to cross-sector coordination. What we've shared there are some sort of success criteria. These are some highlights that have been provided by countries. They've been kind of directly inspired by country responses to the questionnaires. And that gives a nice starting point, if you like, for some of those. I'd also point to the upcoming, as Sandra mentioned, sort of revamped IWRM toolbox, which will also provide a lot of useful case studies and experiences. and have this community of practice where people will be able to share their knowledge and resources again. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And I believe the revamped IWRM toolbox will be going live in December this year, so please be on the lookout for that. There's time for one more question, and I'd like to ask this one to Maya, please, which it's a question about a particular country that has a medium-high final score, but financing is medium-low. And it seems that for many countries, financing is lagging behind. Any quick reflections from your side on how countries can increase the financing for IWRM?
Thanks, Colin. Yes, I mean, the financing sort of broadly is the lowest scoring dimension for most countries. And partly this is due to lack of dedicated financing for IWRM activities specifically. This is just to clarify. So, of course, we're looking at maybe a lacking in overall water and sanitation budgets, but it is specifically activities that would then promote either capacity building on IWRM, management instruments that enable IWRM that is lacking behind. What we have seen, that of course the pure lacking of financing is one issue, but there is scope for improving that by better coordination. So if we're looking with coordination, for example, with power sector or ecosystem management, I mean, IWRM has links to a lot of those sectors and a lot of those activities. So there is potential in maybe harvesting or maximizing efficient use of those resources if we're linking to IWRM activities. And that can be many examples. We can also look at establishing, for example, payments for ecosystem services arrangements that then spread across not only water management directly, but also ecosystem management, ecosystem restoration, also, enabling better agricultural activities. So I think the key message is, of course, there is need for more financing, but thinking about it innovatively and making these linkages with other users, other sectors is one way to maybe think about it innovatively. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much to our three panelists. And the question and answer session has now concluded, but the dialogue, we want that very much to continue into the future. And we will provide the contact addresses at the end where you can get in touch with us if you have any more questions, and hopefully you will. So with this, I'd now like to hand over to Maya to share with us some key resources that all of you who have been listening to these presentations and hopefully are interested in taking this and going further with it. How can you do that? So over to you, Maya.
Thanks, Colin. So this is just very briefly, I would like to point participants to two key resources. And I saw there are questions about country examples and about the data. So the IWRM data portal contains the data part of this presentation. So you can access both the full country reports, so the official reporting materials for both years, so 17 and 2020. You can also access the regional reports, the regional analysis documents, and also national summaries. So for users with stakeholders or other purposes, all countries have sort of a short 2-page visual summary produced in 7 languages. So these are all freely accessible to anybody who might be interested in exploring the data or using the data products for various activities. And also, of course, the support program website. And support program website has links to the updated IWRM toolbox, so you'll find that there. Apart from that, you can also see a map of the various activities that the support program has in the different countries. You can also see country videos. We talked a bit about the specific actions. There is Action Plan Searcher where you can really explore and get inspiration of what are the very specific actions countries have identified as ways to further their IWRM implementation. And of course, also access to reports, events, upcoming webinars, and other resources. So I would like to highlight these two. And of course, if you have any specific questions or looking for specific information, please feel free to reach out to us. That's all from my side. I'll say thank you, and I will hand over to our colleague Joachim Harlin, the Chief of Freshwater Ecosystems Unit at UNEP and Chief Manager of the UNEP DHI Center for closing remarks. Thank you. Over to you, Joachim.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this very interesting session. There are so many. It's so rich in terms of what's being communicated, but I'll try to give some highlights. So what we've seen and heard here is that IWRM is making progress. We saw a 5% increase from the baseline to the latest survey. So we're moving from medium low to medium high, which might be a small progress, and we need to double the pace, in fact. But the good news is that we have such a lot of good examples from countries that have made rapid progress, where the 22 countries have done so. And we now also have a better understanding what's holding back and what's available for us to move forward. I think that some countries that have, for example, shown that they have made dedicated efforts, put in place task forces, have mobilized also different stakeholders, starting to align and coordinate between ministries and in their policies, are also making progress. There's a lot we can learn from that, and we heard also that there are resources and tools available, the IWRM acceleration package and so on. So I encourage everybody to take part of that, and also to engage with us in our IWRM SDG 6 support program. When I think about this in practice, it can sound a little bit nebulous. What is mobilizing political will, and what are we really talking about? But what we see very often is that land management and these different sectors that we're trying to coordinate between food, energy, industry, water supply, nature conservation, tourism, and so forth, are proceeding and doing their own business. And here we can see the competing actions and competing needs. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to very much create then an understanding of the cause and effect between these actions, communicate between them, and align these efforts. And I think that's very much what's needed in practice. So this is not just, some nebulous mobilize some general political will. It's very practical, and we see it happening every day at the catchment level. So I'm very pleased now to conclude this session, and again point you to all those valuable resources and findings. And for those that have time, please stay on and watch a closing video. Thank you very much.
In today's interconnected world, we face complex challenges. And at the heart of them, there is one element that connects us all: water. Every year, we use more water, yet global availability is constant. If we don't act soon, by 2050, water scarcity may threaten up to 5 billion people. In 2015, the global community agreed on a unified agenda to solve these challenges. These common objectives are called the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. These goals should be achieved by 2030. Like water, they are all integrated. We can achieve them if we come together to manage our limited water resources like never before. That's why UNEP, UNEP DHI Center, CAPNet, and GWP have joined forces to establish the SDG 6 IWRM support program, a platform to accelerate and coordinate effective action. Different stakeholders, but together they have a common goal: to understand the water-related challenges, design viable solutions for them, and implement integrated responses to help countries achieve the SDGs. Joining the dots between countries facing similar challenges, helping them to act locally, achieve their national targets, and link them to a global movement. Come together. Be a part of the solution.